You're listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio.
Hi, I'm Davey.
I'm Warren.
I'm Jake.
I'm Xavier.
And we are
the Bargain Bin Gaymers.
You did it. Congratulations.
That was only the third take.
You only look moderately embarrassed.
Yeah, absolutely.
How was it for everyone else? Good?
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, very fine. Yeah.
Thank you so much for indulging me in that. As always, I can't talk. So this is the podcast, YouTube show, and Twitch stream where we play the cheapest and not always shittest games out there so that you don't have to, and hopefully find a few hidden gems along the way. And I'm just going to get rid of that shittest part because nothing we're playing is shit anymore. We've actually been playing some really good stuff.
That's what I was thinking that the other day, actually. I was like,
it's almost insulting.
Yeah. It's become not unironic. I don't know. It's actually, now it's just a title.
Yeah, well, I mean, the show started as me like just bagging the absolute crap out of terrible games that only cost like 95 cents on Steam, but it's
evolved.
It has evolved, much like myself.
Yeah, that if you lost your way, one or the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Literally, as so much money has come in from all your wonderful Patreon people, you've been able to splash out and get the $2
great
and
segue.
$3 games.
I was to say, they're either loving or hating where it's gone.
I know. Wow. It's like he read the script. Before we would continue with this absolute whatever's going on right now, I would just like to give a big shout out to all of our BQN Podcast Network patrons, especially to this show's associate producer, Sam Johnson. Thank you very much, Sam, for your continued financial support of the network. You help keep the podcast free. You will never hear an ad on any of the BQN network podcasts. And if you would like to help keep this and other BQN podcasts coming to you every single week, please sign up to be a patron over at patreon.com/BQN. We have got a very different show for you today. You may notice the absence of a particular someone. My usual co-host, Mitch, is not here because he's useless and unreliable. No.
Story checks out.
Yeah. No, just kidding. Mitch will be away for the next couple of weeks, as he mentioned at the end of the last episode, because he's had a little bit of a medical procedure. He's fine, but he's just got a little bit of recovery. So I'm very pleased today to be joined by new co-hosts. You've met them before on the pod. We have
new old temporary co-hosts.
Yeah. You actually get
returning
friends of the pod is, I believe, the term that we use. Yeah. But we've got Jake and Warren from the Melbourne Gaymers. Gentlemen, hello. Good to see you. How you been?
Good. Thank you for having us back. Yeah, I know it's not about Melbourne Gamers today, but I'm excited to help out.
Yeah. I think, surprised that you had us back.
Why is that?
Considered. Well, I just feel like the last one was just such a resounding success. Nothing would ever come close to that. And so this is just, everything's a pale imitation.
Fair enough. You're just like, that's it.
Yeah.
You don't have to do the podcast anymore. You've peaked. You've had the Melbourne Gamers on.
Peaked now. Everything else is just going to feel bad. So we just leave it at that. So I'm surprised you went back for a second take.
That is so modest of you, Warren. Thank you so much for bringing such humility to this program. Well, thank you so much for helping out. It's really good to have you here today. And here we are, of course, in the fabulous This Is a Studio here in Prahran, Melbourne, part of Pop Plant Productions. We have got a very extra special guest here on the show today, and that is the fabulous we have a doctor on the show. Dr. Xavier Ho.
Hello.
How are you, Xavier?
I'm feeling pretty good. Yeah, it's really nice to be invited in here. This is a very intimate space, I must say. My voice sounds really loud in here, but it's really good to be here.
So Xavier is an award-winning queer researcher, artist, designer, and curator focusing on the queer independent games community, and you're currently working at Monash University. So Xavier, that's really, really cool. Like when I came across you and found out that there is a whole academic field around video games and queer representation and the queer community in video games, I was like, this is what this show was made for. So tell us a little bit about what it is you do and how you found yourself in this field of research.
Oh my God, this is making me sound like I'm a lot. I don't think I am that much. I have to say, being a queer person and someone who's really keen about game and gaming, that has shaped a lot of my life growing up. I was really inspired in 2017 when I attended a seminar by Associate Professor Adrian Shaw. I think that was, forgot where it was. It might have been in Dundee in Scotland, probably in like a games conference where she was talking about her work, which was the LGBTQ video game archive. I highly recommend for any of you to check out if you're interested in queer representation all the way in the late 1970s to modern day. She's done a lot of work with her research assistants and her team. And I was just like, wow, you can do a research in games. And not only that, in gay and lesbian and queer intersectional kinds of identities. It was mind-blowing. And as a PhD student, sort of 4 years in, by the way, I did mine in 8 years. It was a very long PhD. At the time, I was like, this is incredible. Like, I was in game studies, but I didn't know you could do this. So when I finished my PhD, which was looking at game ideas and conceptualizing sort of how they're connecting and influencing each other, I was like, I'm going straight into the next one, which is like queer representation influences and how we play and make games to tell our stories in the way that people do, because it's fun. And so the great thing, I think, about being an academic is you get to pick your projects. You know, you're not having to respond to your boss to say you have to do this. You're like, no, this is my research project. And that's what I'm going to focusing on. So yeah, I've had the privilege, I think, since joining Monash 5 years ago to do this work. And I'm still continuing to do this work. My primary research is interviews. So I also interview game designers. I sit down and talk to people about like, you know, what kind of games are you making right now? And sort of what sort of stories and characters do you have? And it's not just like representing characters and stories, but the types of messaging and mechanics that people are doing. So yeah, I'm just feeling like it's the work that needs to be done, and a project will never be really ended. Is always, people are very complex subjects. So
it's again constantly evolving, I imagine, over years of the industry and education as it slowly starts to seep into people's minds in the gay agenda, gay game agenda.
But it's also like games can be queer and gay without you having to make it queer and gay, right? Like, I think people play role play all the time, so they kind of insert themselves, but also they see themselves differently through a different species, through a different character storyline, through a different game mechanic, like Octodad, I don't know, just weird game like that. I think it's really great that we're able to talk about queerness and gayness in games.
But I also think it's evolved a lot, because I remember, you know, back in the day playing games, and you've got maybe toxic masculinity is the word for Duke Nukem Forever, and that kind of game where you have access to just flash money and women to like dance on stripper poles. And now you instead can log on to Steam and have a whole section of just LGBT tagged games where there are pages and pages and pages of content that is just being more mainstream and more accepted and more available for everyone. Like, it was hard to get games originally hard in terms of the small selection that was available and then going to the store and having something that could run it. Whereas you can sit down and 3 clicks later purchase queer games from indie developers on the other side of the world. Like, that accessibility and proliferation of queer games must both make that research easier and harder, because there's now so much more, but also so much more representation. Do you think that has enabled this like research to even be possible? Like, if you tried to do this 20 years ago, how many queer games do you think how many games do you think there would be to actually look at? That's not even queer-baited games, because I don't think even they were pretty common back in the day.
Yeah, I think there's this kind of idea that queer games have recently exploded. And in a way, if you just look at numbers they have, I remember when I started my research and I looked at Steam, I think that was back in 2020, Steam had 98 back then, LGBTQ plus tagged games. And I could scroll in 2 pages and I got to the end of it. I'm like, well, Steam is pretty shit. There could be more games like that. Because back then, when you look at itch.io, which was a different independent games marketplace, you easily had 2,000-3,000 LGBTQ tagged games already.
At the same time.
Right. And so 5 years later, Steam has grown quite a bit. I think with those tags, and this is just my understanding, they are the user, like, you know, anyone can tag a game. but Steam curates specific tags that will be put on the storefront or will be as part of the categories. And they only recently put LGBTQ plus, like in the last 5 years or so, as like an official tag. So I think that sort of officialness to say, yes, you can find a game via this tag and we'll give you all a list, has kind of helped surging games coming out.
So they've embraced it more, or have realized that it's there now and they need to categorize it better, or so it's kind of always been there, but
I think it's the problem of genres, right? Because we've always talked about video games being racing, simulation, role-playing, adventure. So you kind of miss out, like when you put genre as a game mechanic focused thing, like you have roguelike games or you have simulation games, you're missing out on a lot of different cultures and identities that's not just going to be thought about.
Yeah.
So the moment
genres are very one-dimensional, can be a very one-dimensional slither, and you're almost talking about like horizontal categories.
So the moment you're broadening the idea of not just talking about games as genres, but maybe the modes of play, like co-op and couch games are quite common now, but also thinking about dating sims and visual novels and thinking about LGBTQ and like historically accurately representing that kind of thing. Suddenly it's about like a lot more useful to talk about games like that, like tags.
You can kind of put like, you're putting like gay in front of a lot of genres now though.
Or bara.
Like Dream Daddy is a gay dating simulator, and we played Queer Quest a few weeks ago, and that was a gay point and click kind of title.
The mouse is gay.
The mouse is gay.
I guess that introduced an interesting point. Like, what would you consider make something a queer game? Is it because it has a queer protagonist or queer storylines or a queer developer? Like, what would make you consider a game to be queer in that regard?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Initially, when I started the research, I thought a queer game had to have certain criteria because in the beginning, I was like, okay, there's like thousands of LGBTQ plus games. Where do I start? So initially, I thought, okay, I'm going to start by looking at game developers that are making queer and gay and lesbian and all kinds of games that have a really strong audience focus. So I started by saying, if a game just features a gay protagonist, but they're like, just showing up once in a while and they don't really do anything, and there's no real, like any exploration.
It's not essential to that
I wasn't really
character,
looking at that compared to games that had a main like scenario, quest, and storyline that was featuring and centering characters that have those kind of lives. And it's speaking to an audience who are like, this is the kind of game that I want, right? So I started by saying, I'm going to focus on games that are targeted at the gay and lesbian and the queer audience or transgender audience. But later on, as I kind of kept on doing this work and interviewing people, I realized that that scope was still too narrow because you have people who are making and playing games that are just in their own community. Like you can take a D&D game and you can make it super fucking queer. Yeah. And it doesn't really matter if D&D didn't have any queer representation until the most recent D&D that came out 3 months ago. People have been making queer characters and stories for like a long time, even before D&D was a thing, right? People have been playing games just like being themselves. And so I kind of started to realize that it's not just the characters, it's not just about the stories, but just by being able to accept that the world is not so rigid in boxes and binary, but there are ways that you can like play things and be weird about it and be yourself. That can be queer in many ways, that you're kind of pushing against the status quo. And so it's interesting to think about, like you're just talking about earlier, that queer games has becoming more mainstream, but queerness in itself is also pushing against the idea of like what is mainstream, right? Yeah. So this weird tension of how can we be the people that don't fit, trying to fit into a world, but also trying to like to say, hey, we're here. I think this should just be normal, but also we're not normal. So it's like, where does
it's like,
bit,
where's the line?
Does that, I mean, because the definition, I think, should be, it sounds like incredibly broad in that having queer themes or designed for a queer audience or to, tell queer stories, but that you can have a sandbox game like D&D where you make it queer because of how you do it means that not any game can be queer, but something's not sectioned off where it's for that part of the community and anyone can enjoy those games and explore that theme and enjoy it. Is that fair?
That is totally fair.
So you had the Pride at Play exhibition, for example, right? So let's plug that a little bit. So this is back from 2023. And I've got the website open in front of me, right? So Pride at Play was thoughtful queer games for Oceania and the Asia Pacific. Now, I've played a couple of games on the list here, right? And I want to kind of just tap into a little bit about what you were saying there about what makes a game queer, right? So the top 2 games I can see here on this list, Wildflowers and Kinda World. The latter I've got on my phone, Kinda World. So you just kind of grow pot plants and water them, and it's one of those like kind of cozy games. And Wildflowers seems like Stardew Valley with witches, right? So taking these 2 games as an example, what got these into the queer collection at Pride at Play?
Yeah, so that's what I was saying before. When I started, I thought I was only going to focus on games that have a queer audience specifically. Then I realized there's so many different forms and manifestations of queerness that's not just characters. Like, I think we're often really focused on, like, if the game doesn't feature a particular character that is queer, that game is not queer because, where are these people, right? Like, how do we see ourselves in them?
Yeah.
But I now understand, kind of having done this work for quite a while, and I'm still kind of trying to learn more about it. We see ourselves through not just characters, but also through game mechanics. Like, if you can become a blob and you can kind of merge through things, there's that sense of fluidity, and the idea of like getting away from your body for a moment might be really opening for some people. In the case of Kinda World, they tried to have a non-binary character that is like this semi-dog that's just there that speaks to you.
Yes, I know.
And then so it's like, it's not that there is a storyline with romance and the exploration of sexuality, but there's this universal acceptedness that you're already there. And the dog is like, I don't really know what my pronoun should be, but I think they them fits me really well. Mm-hmm. So I don't mind what pronoun you want to use for me. But today I would like to tell you a little bit more about the pot plant that you're doing, right?
Yeah.
And so I started to realize, like, there are games that are made in the 80s and 90s that are typically very situated in a particular scene that can be confronting for a lot of people. But in the more, I would say, post 2007 and onwards, games has become to be like, there's too much trauma in the queer community. Like, we should have more joyful games where people can just be people.
The bury your gays trope.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's like, there's a gay character, they're going to die in the first
it's like
10
movies.
minutes or
Movies
something like that, right?
Yeah.
So we've moved on from that. And I think game developers are like, no, we need more joyful games. So because also Pride at Play was launched as part of the Sydney World Pride Festival, we were like, this is a celebratory moment for queer people. So we specifically focused on games that's not just like, we want to push a particular agenda, but also let's be ourselves and just kind of see what a queer world could look like. So we try to broaden that sort of scope. In terms of Wildflowers, they had a gay wedding as a thing you can do with a werewolf NPC. So it was really cute. And a lot of the like narrative designer and artists in the games are either non-binary or queer themselves. And you can see throughout many places, if you know what you're looking for, you will definitely see like moments and hints, if not even really explicit characters as well. So we wanted to celebrate all kinds of queerness when we kind of curated this exhibition.
Yeah. And does that kind of play into what we talk about being a queer game as well, is the creatives behind it too?
And other players as well.
I've done a lot of research trying to find, more queer games to play, especially in the mainstream. You get a lot of the same recommendations over and over again. One that comes up is like Celeste, which is a little bit more, I guess, metaphorical.
Have you guys played Celeste? So it was highly recommended, and I read about it being a metaphor for the person's own journey that they were going through. I think as they transitioned, but I've not actually.
They do have a non-binary flag I forgot the main character's name, in their home, like on a computer. There is a little flag there, so it is pretty explicit. But I think Celeste is the story from memory. It's more about overcoming imposter syndrome, like the idea that I am not good enough, and the idea that I can't be who I am, and the person's kind of talking me down. So that plays into the person's accepting or not accepting their own identity a little bit, because they're also running away from home. There's a scene where they're calling their parents, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
What was the game that had you were going through like a story in a house? It's like something home. That's gone.
Gone Home.
Gone Home. Yeah.
Gone Home.
Was that a lesbian story?
Definitely.
Yeah. Because I recall I played that and it was kind of hinting, and there was all these hints.
Oh, it is so obvious. And if you just read the diaries, you're like,
but now, and like it's just that's I
feel like
remember that.
I'm also seeing things like fan fiction, making it into like interactive fictions. I'm seeing people reskinning games of no mechanics to make it really gay and queer.
Yeah.
We've also had people who are kind of like veteran game developers, and they're like, fuck it, today, done with making AAA game development, I'm going to make like a gay dance game. You know, it's just like going straight up.
Gay GDR.
There's all kinds now.
I will admit, as a gamer originally, I didn't play too many indie titles. It was a lot of like mainstream or AAA games. I still think my first experience of queers in gaming in that space was probably Dragon Age Origins, where you could romance, I want to say Zevran, some rogue who I didn't really want in the party anyway.
Of course,
what I specifically did it just to have that. And I weirdly think that having that represented in media for me, which was gaming at the time, really does help a lot with people with their own self-acceptance and journey. Do you find that now that this is more easily accessible and ubiquitous, do you think that's contributing to people being more comfortable with who they are, seeing themselves portrayed in media?
So in my research, one of the things I've learned that's really interesting about people identifying with a character, it's not always the sexuality actually or gender.
Right.
It could just be like this person acts in a particular way that gives off a vibe that's like, wait, that's me. That's how I speak all the time, you know?
Yeah.
Or it could be their particular interest or hobbies or their personality, their neurodivergences. It could be like the way that they handle things kind of gives you a vibe of, wow, that's like my dad. That's how he would have done it, you know? And I think sexuality is only one very narrow intersection of who we are, even though like there are gay and lesbian characters in the games, and we obviously super appreciate games that include those characters. A character should be much more broader and all-encompassing and be rich and complex and multifaceted. And I think even people who are like not queer in any way, sometimes they might even also identify a little bit, right, with how some of the queer characters might act as well. So I think one of the things I'm trying to say is representation of gayness and lesbianness and like transgender is important. And I think we should do more of that. And in many different ways, because everyone's different. So the more examples we have in the world will help communicating, I guess, through media representation, just the different sort of richness and complexity that there are. But also just having like more rich characters in more camera scene time, I suppose, will help in general.
So
really.
Avoiding tropes and caricatures and stereotypes and saying you can be all these things without having to fit a mold that was easy to package. Because I mean, tropes and stereotypes exist because it makes it easier for our brain to go, if they're this, they're also this. So if they're gay, they love theatre, or if they are whatever, we then mentally fill in the blanks. You think that having more developed stories and rich characters with actual, you know, personality and believability means that you can have better representation of people, where it's not just the one-dimensional thing. It's not just their sexuality or their job. It's everything about who they are as a person makes it easier.
I have a really good example for you. So in a different research project, we're currently kind of making a set of training, I guess, tools for teachers to talk to secondary school students about gender and sexuality. And one of the scenarios they wrote about was like a coming out story for, you know, just kind of playing through the scenario and asking students, what do you think? Was that the right thing to say? And one of the things they wrote, I think in the initial draft that I saw was basically person A comes out to their close friend, person B, to be like, you know, I think I might not be straight. And then one day later, person B comes back to person A and say, wow, I always wanted to have a gay friend. And I read that script and I'm like, no gay person will ever say that. Or at least say that in the way that I read it, that kind of script, right? So I think when my point is when we write characters or when game designers write characters or anybody who wants to write a gay story like a fan fiction, having that perspective, having that lived experience will already color how they're going to write. So I think it's less about like, or rather, it's important tropes to avoid it, but also having like hiring actual gay writers, having people on the team that are making games that have those experiences will help guiding, making the game in a way that feels true and authentic because they know what it's like, you know? And so it's so important to think about all these different games that are coming out and think about who's on the teams to really help rounding those perspectives.
Is that one of the reasons that you feel or may feel that the library has grown so much is because people can more accessibly make games these days as well? Because it's not as difficult as it used to be, I guess?
Yeah, we have like all these free and open source tools, right? Like, I mean, Unity and Unreal aside, which are pretty good, like they're free now, which is awesome. There is Rampy, which is like a Python-based visual novel tool. There is Twine, which is an HTML-based, also like visual novel interactive fiction tool that's really popular. There is Bitsy, which we talked about before earlier at the pub.
Yep.
It's like a little up, down, left, right.
Oh, yeah.
Game Boy
like Amiga games.
Yeah, you can just play along. It's really easy to make. And there's more coming out as well. Like I know the company Inco, who's like been making games as well. They also make a tool called Ink, which is like this really comprehensive narrative game scripting tool that you can integrate into any game of any scale. And so, and they make the tool like really, like it's open source and free. So,
so cool. There's like just free options nowadays. Like
and if you know how to write, you know how to learn how to program. Like if you know how to write, you can make a game with Twine and Bitsy, right? Because the tools are there. Yeah. And the script really just looks like person : says something. And if you don't want to make a link, just put brackets around like in Wikipedia.
Yeah.
So it's so easy to create interactivity and go in between things.
Has the same thing happened on, I guess, I'm not too familiar with the publisher side, but on the publisher side, in terms of getting your game out there, there's a lot more avenues that people can get to. Like, for example, now Steam, they can publish their own games and self-publish. But are there any publishers out there that are looking and actively seeking to help promote these games?
Yeah, I don't know any publishers. By the way, if anyone's listening to this and you're a publisher, I would love to hear a publisher that's like, we're going to publish queer games and that's all we're about. Cool.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because we've had a few queer devs on the show recently and they're all self-publishing.
Exactly.
Because they can't find a publisher, especially when they're putting a game out there that is clearly queer, whether it's Queer Quest by Queermo Games, they had to publish it themselves and they wrote to publishers and they said it was crickets, which is really kind of upsetting. What are some of the, quote unquote queer games that you're playing right now or that you think that people should be on the lookout for?
Okay, so I mean, the game I'm playing right now, to be honest, I'm playing Monster Hunter Wilds right now. It is not queer explicitly in any way, except in this iteration of the game, they made the armor options completely gender-free. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the history of Monster Hunter. It is always split in two classes and two genders for the longest time. So if you're a gunner or a swordsman, you will have your own separate armors in early days. And then if you're a man or woman, and that's the two options you got back in the day, you will have two different sets of armors. And obviously the women are dressed very cladly. The male is very bulky, just completely stereotypes, right? But you can do that now. So in Monster Hunter Wilds, they completely removed that restriction. Whenever you get a new set of like materials, if you want to make any armor, you have options with both the male and the female versions what they have. So it's still quite binary, but you also have like the alpha and beta version, which have different like customization options mechanical wise to customize the skills you get in those armors.
You know what gets me with some of those things, like the customization, when they used to hide it behind a gender thing, was that it's harder almost to code to make it exclusive for one or the other and not let it mix kind of thing. And it's like almost easy just to have all the options and not have to segregate them. Like you're just putting more work into your game for having to try and wall off all these options from each other.
No, you're very right. In one of the recent interviews that one of my students have done, they found one of the games, they were like, okay, actually, we don't have that much budget. We just want to have one body type for all of our characters. And the only way you can customize are the clothing. So they just made, you have this one shape and you can customize your hair, you can customize what you wear, and you can kind of express your gender that way without having to do this awkward, you're either male, bulky, or female, kind of a thing. That's just like, that's been done so many times. But kind of going towards like, besides what I'm playing right now, one of the games that I really enjoy, and I still enjoy it if I ever go back to it in Pride I Play, is So About Last Night. I
tried this the other day, based on your recommendation.
How good is it?
Yeah. Okay, for a text-based game, I was so absorbed in it.
Yeah, so the game, I believe, is set in 1997, if I'm not wrong, where you're kind of still like before the smartphones, and you're like this girl who's just gone to a high school party or college
I think it was
party.
it seemed like a college party.
It sounds like a college party,
the amount
right?
of drugs and sex that were happening.
And there was alcohol, there was definitely sex and loud music and rave. And the game kind of starts you out by you're just going outside to take a bit of a chill because it was quite noisy. You met some people that are kind of your friends. You met this girl, and it's pretty obvious that you're also playing as a girl as well, who is kind of mysterious and interesting. You have a bit of a, like trying to not quite flirt, but you're kind of saying something that's kind of under the tones. And then suddenly there was a big white flash and you kind of like fade out and you wake up in the morning realizing you have this thirst for blood. And you're like, what is
usually do
going on with my life, right?
Yeah.
So the character goes through the sudden transition of like, I've heard about vampires. I don't think this is what it is. That can't exist in here. Who was that girl I just spoke to? Why was she so close to me? Why did she feel that way?
Why does the sun hurt?
I know. And so the whole
Is it
game,
Twilight? Why am I sparkling?
the whole game, you're just basically hitching rides or going to friends' houses just in this town to be like, has anyone seen this girl? Who was she? And tracking her down. And it is written in a way that depending on which route you take, you will eventually end up in the same place, but you get a different vibe of like different characters and different angles and perspectives.
Yeah. The whole thing is just in text.
Yeah.
So you occasionally you get an option of like, you do this or you do that. But otherwise you're reading the story.
So it's like a book. Interactive novel?
Yeah.
I guess you could
interactive fiction is the
interactive fiction.
Turn to page 62.
Yeah,
but you died.
It's written really well, and I thought it was going to be done in a few minutes, and then an hour or more later, I'm still sitting there playing it, and I mean, it's so interesting to say playing it.
You're reading,
you're experiencing it.
Yes.
I guess is probably the right way to put it.
One of the things I gave recommendations on, and they're also part of Pride I Play, is Kaiju Noir, where it's a visual novel that you're like this giant monster, Godzilla-like kaiju, who's living underground away from human society for like hundreds or thousands of years. And you have your own society and everything. And it's a murder mystery where you're like this independent detective who's trying to solve a murder for a client. It's very noir. It's got all the tropes that you can expect for the film. But it's also very non-binary and trans in the way that it plays out. There's even like a reunion moment when you kind of find your long-lost sibling who has not like transitioned. It's quite beautiful. Yeah. The person, Kaiju, Jamie Kaiju Marriage is their name. They were a games journalist actually and wrote for a bunch of things. Yeah. So that would be one example where they're like, they found the outlet. Not only they're writing about games, but they're also writing with the games tools. Using Rempi, I'm pretty sure that's the tool that I used. Fuzzy goes, can I plug their games that they're making right now?
Absolutely, of course you can.
So they're making a game right now that the name I cannot remember, so you'll have to find it later. It's about a like a housemate of renters with an evil, witchy landlord who's really bad. And it's a very queer story where you're trying to kind of live through a horror rental issues. And you have to report all these things.
It's
in the non-fiction section.
Put this under simulation.
Because a lot of gay people have like precarities in financial situations. You live in share houses and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So they recognize Australia, especially being like in the rental country as is, it's going to resonate with a lot of people. So they're making a game right now literally about you living through rental horror stories. And they actually solicited, like last year, they put out a call to be like, hey, if you have any horror rental stories, we want to hear about them because we're going to put them in our game. And so they got lots of good examples.
There would be no shortage of those, which is both sad and terrifying.
I'm picturing a mini game where you have to try and get your property manager to address the black mold in the bathroom.
But also like their landlord is kind of quite evil because she just doesn't really give a shit in this game.
You said fiction, right?
Yeah. No. Games are made in real life. So they also reflect
art imitates life in
ways.
this.
Yeah. Indeed. Yeah. And before Fuzzy Ghost made that game, they also made a previous game called A Queer Man Peering into a Rock Pool.jpg. I know that title because we wanted initially to include their game in Pride I Play, but they were also at the Sydney Powerhouse in a different exhibition. And they were like, we already got this. We can't be in two places. We have a contract with them. And we're like, damn it. So can you write an afterword for us? So luckily we got them to write a bit in the book. But they have this other game where it's about an elderly man who has recently lost his partner. And he has like a bit of a dementia or something. He doesn't quite remember what happens, but he's quite happy. So you play through kind of his journey of walking around his little like Queenslander house kind of a thing with those houses on stilts. And you're kind of going to the bedroom and going to the pond, going to like the backyard, going around the living room to kind of find all these things and remembering those joy that he had with his partner in that kind of life. And it's just really wonderful.
That sounds so, I feel like
it is so good.
Well up so much. If I was
Yeah.
We've given you a bit of to add to your wish list and
Yeah.
a little bit, haven't we?
Yes.
I'm interested though, like in some of the ones that are non sort of like narrative driven though, like because so many of the ones I've come across, which have been great, have been, you know, like About Last Night and a few others like Strait. I don't know if you've come across that one, which is again very visual novel style. Are there any out there which people might be able to find as a more like traditional gaming experience, platformer, or like 3D action adventure style game coming up through this scene, which fits into this kind of LGBTQ category?
Yeah.
Queer Mario?
Queer Mario.
Queer Mario. What
Queer
is
Mario.
that?
I don't know.
Mario?
Just like waves at the Goombas and they like explode or something.
That would be pretty fun. Another game that I can recommend in Pride Play, it's a role-playing game for 2 players. It's called Our Mundane Supernatural Life.
It's a card game, right?
It's a card game.
Yeah.
But the cards are agendas. So basically the cards are like date and then like agenda. And so you play as 2 people who live together. So it could be siblings, parent and child, domestic partners. You could be queer. Could be played straight if you really want. But the 2 game designers are like queer couples. So like just making this game based on their experience even before COVID, living together and also making games together. And one of you is a supernatural monster, and it could be anything. It could be werewolf, vampire, a ghost, a bee. And the other person is just like a normal human, but you live together. And so the game kind of asks you to identify a particular problem, like a supernatural problem, like werewolves, you know, sheds, I don't know, turns into crazy big things, goes on rage. And then like a mundane problem, which could be like, I don't know, my exam is coming up and I'm kind of scared, or
like the dishes.
I have a job interview. Yeah, dishes is not being done. I don't know. You kind of decide on a trouble, and then the 2 of you need to set an agenda throughout the day. It could be from when you wake up to when you go to bed, basically, to kind of help each other solving those problems. And so I think like as queer people, monstrosity has always been a thing for a very long time. Like when you look at shows like Rocky Horror Picture Show, things like, you know, shows that has like vampires and werewolves, or even like Frankenstein. Sometimes queer people have associated themselves with those monsters because those are rejects of society, right?
Yeah, they're the different ones.
Yeah, exactly. So there's this oddness that's being reflected. And then so when I think about this particular role-playing game, which you can play through in like an hour and a half, one of you is this kind of sheltered reject that's been hiding away from human life that have a legitimate supernatural problem that they need to solve. And the other person is kind of having this privilege of being a human, and there's like no other issues except you have human problems, and you kind of understand each other in different ways. And you're trying to play through that day. And you role play it out, there's things that come up. And the game is really cute. Like at the end of the day, you can optionally play, you're going to bed together. You're kind of talking a little bit just to rewind and debrief how it has gone, and then you can go to bed. If you want to cuddle, you can. It's just part of the game, you know, depends on what you want to do. And that will be a game that's very different. Like it's queer in the mechanics, and it's intentional from the game designers. There are no baked-in queer characters to romance or to roleplay, but if you want to play a monster, there's all kinds of things you can pull.
Yeah. Do you find are the queer board games? I mean, I know of some queer board games, but do they leap over into...
My eyes are lighting up because you asked me that question.
Okay. I thought
should Warren and I leave?
I'm so happy. I'm so happy.
Yeah.
When we were at the pub earlier, I know we were talking about Gloomhaven and this dungeon crawler thing. There's another dungeon crawler game that I played called Artisans of Splendid Vale. It's made by a non-binary game designer, Nikki Valance, who worked for Fantasy Flight Games that made all the Call of Cthulhu, really major games. And then they eventually went and I think worked at Renegade or different games and something like that. And they freelance and consult. They wanted to make a game that's very queer. And then the publishers just was like, I don't know. So I think they moved on and they found a publisher. So now it's out, and it's been out for like 2.5 years, called Artisans of Splendid Vale, in which you have a full cast of queer and people of color in kind of all kinds of wonderful places. And it's really culturally grounded in many different ways. And you are like this I guess, villagers who kind of all live in this magical village. But once in a while, there's this meteor that just kind of strikes randomly into the valley. But your village's survival depends on the rare metals that come from the meteor. So your characters are like this group of adventurers who goes out whenever there's a meteor strikes, and you're trying to get to the rare metals to kind of bring it back. And the whole game, I remember this really well because my name is Xavier. And when I first played the game, there's 4 characters you can pick. And one of them, his name is Harvey. And I thought, Harvey or Xavier, this is like, I'll just pick this character. Why not? Literally, not even kidding, the first day I play through the game, there's a bit of a dungeon crawling, there's a storytelling moment, and there's like a bit of an end of a day scenario. The character's partner, who's also a guy, proposes to him. And I'm like, oh my God, what is happening right now? Like, this is such a cool game. What? And so, and the game kind of plays throughout. There's different relationships in different characters. There's like moments where you go on and chill. It's not just like a combat sim. There's like an actual village life and a character's life happening. And that will be a very queer board game if anyone wants to get into it.
Yeah, because we've been playing Molly House. Molly House?
Yeah. I went and kickstarted Molly House by
Tell me about it.
Cole. Have you played it before?
I have not played it.
The designer essentially wanted to have a queer game telling the story of what it was like in Victorian London. So the designer previously did John Company to try and aim to tell history through the medium of a board game. And John Company specifically is about an evil corporation that controlled Dutch East Indies and all of that. But Molly House, they said, look, we would like to have a game which represents the anxiety and joy of being a queer person in Victorian London, where you want to try and find other queer people and indulge your proclivities and have a good time without drawing too much attention to yourself. So during the game, you play as a queer person who is trying to find joy by participating in events in the community without attracting too much attention from the Society for Reformation of Manners, the prudes.
A lot of the cards and all that are all written in oldie English. So
Because they wanted to try and take as much historical information. A lot of the records of both events that were done and charges laid against these people were from court documents of people who were being prosecuted.
Yeah.
And so they have the text in it is from the court documents from 1800s.
That's so cool.
It's very cool. And I would recommend it. The game is not easy to teach because it's quite abstract about how the game will actually play out. But the experience of doing it, where you are trying to experience joy and bring joy to the community while simultaneously not wanting to get caught and hanged for your actions, actually created this great tension of when I was playing it of, I want to do this, but I also don't want to tell anyone, but I also don't want to die, which I felt would have been really interesting and not obviously the same as going through it, but it was an interesting insight into this feeling of wanting to just live your life with this anxiety of being found out and having things go. So if anyone is interested, it was on Kickstarter. I don't know if you can get it from normal stores at the moment, but Molly House was really good. I've played it a couple of times. The victory condition is if you win, if you have the most happiness that you've found. But the only way that can happen is if the community has reached a net happiness. So you want everyone else to succeed, but you want to be the most successful.
And I've pulled up the website for it. So it's by 2 brothers, Cole and Drew Worley.
Yeah.
Worley?
Whirly Gig Games.
Whirly
Gig.
Gig.
A bunch of good games.
Yeah, that sounds intense. It's something I wanted to get your thoughts on a little bit more about, Xavier. So we've just touched heavily on board games and in the indie scene. Talked a little bit about Monster Hunter and like Dragon Age, like mainstream games before. Like, what are some of the other important examples of queer representation and queer creatives in the mainstream AAA environment? Because it seems few and far between. My personal opinion is that there's a lot of it can be very kind of tokenistic, and then it gets beaten down by the anti-woke crowd. But what are some of the examples you've seen, other than like Monster World that you've just mentioned, that you think are really important?
You're all looking at me, but I'm going to really disappoint you. I don't really play mainstream games. I know.
Yeah.
What? It's just that, like, it's not that I don't enjoy mainstream games. Like, I fully supported when they put queer romance in Horizon Zero Dawn. Yeah. That would be a good example with Aloy. You know, you have the option of, not option. She literally goes like, I want to romance this girl. She's amazing, right? Yeah, and she has this whole storyline. And I also remember, like, Last of Us, not a great example in terms of the transgender representation because there's no exploration whatsoever in the second installment of the game. But there is like a guy who's in great trouble and you're rescuing him. And he eventually talks about how like he has a different name, but that's not important right now. And he just needs to get the hell out of here because the whole world's filled with zombies. I remember those examples really well, but honestly, a lot of the mainstream games, and I don't play that many of them, don't really go in depth compared to the indie games because in indie games, you can just really explore as much as you want in terms of the game designer's desire to play them. And mainstream games typically would just be like, well, that's not important. I guess here's your skill tree. That's way more important. Do that. So yeah, I don't really have any good examples for you. Sorry.
I'm going to say, long-term listeners of the podcast will remember when we were on last time, I talked about how Baldur's Gate 2 was one of the games that really got me into things. And it didn't...
Into gays?
Yes. And it didn't have significant, or any, I can't remember, queer characters in Baldur's Gate 2 specifically. But then you've had the recent release of number 3, which I like the fact it treated sexuality, romantic partners as just, yeah, of course you can. It's not a thing. You can do whatever. Who cares? And everyone in there is basically pansexual and that they'll sleep with or do whatever. And the developer's just like, well, yeah, that happens. It's not a big deal. And their reaction to people's crying woke was like, too bad. I don't understand the problem here. You don't have to live that story if you don't want. You can imagine this however you want. It's your choice. Seeing that change, in our lifetime where it's actually, it's just a thing. It's not different. It's not necessarily exceptional or weird. It's normal is nice to see. And that's a big, massive game. Which let people do that and explore that without fanfare, which is nice to see that curve of, as you said, getting to the point of they exist without exceptionalism, where you can just be that.
And you don't play mainstream gaming a lot, so you might not have an opinion on this, but it seems like the mainstream is just whenever it does try to feature anything slightly diverse now, it comes under extreme attack from that anti-woke brigade.
But it's like the Disney problem. It's you have lots of people within Disney who are queer. Probably full to the brim of people who want to enjoy and share that joy. But then they've gone, well, we're marketing to the world and we have to make sure it gets through the censors in China and Iran. So you know what? This can't go or this can't fly, or it has to be subtly coded that this is what's going on, which is really disappointing. And I understand. And it feels bad to know that there is still a finite point where your story is not worth as much as this market.
This is why I think, so for Jake and Warren, that you've come across Pride at Play for the first time, and since Mitch and I have started diving into this angle for the podcast, finding this almost underground scene of queer games and queer developers has actually been really, really cool. And I said this on the last week's episode, actually. I said, I kind of want it to stay that way because it's kind of cool and different and grungy, and it's for us or for me or whatever. And it doesn't need to play to a mass audience. It just is what it is.
Is that the same thing as like when you've got, queer venues? And then as we become more mainstream and more accepted, then other people want to attend them, then suddenly the queer venue technically is...
You mean like when a hens party rocks up at Circuit?
To go and watch the zoo where they're like, oh, it's so fun to watch them.
I can grab your butt because you're gay.
And that's totally fine.
Yeah.
Is that the same thing that happened to the queer indies? Like, actually, this could make money. We could have everyone here enjoying your story. Do you think that would ruin it when people wouldn't be honest? But like, well, actually... I'm scraping to get by, but if I just change this for the hens party, suddenly I could, pay rent for my evil witch landlord.
The stories that I've heard and played, I feel like are so genuine that you'd hope they wouldn't succumb to the money or something like that, I guess.
It can depend, right? Like, I wonder if you start to find that more mainstream success, I wonder if there's a risk of that pressure of, well, oh, I want more people to play my game so I make more money and I can make more games. And so therefore maybe I need to make my
compromise your art.
Yeah. But I guess maybe and maybe your thoughts on this from someone who's interviewed a lot of these people. Does it seem like that doesn't really seem like their MO though, right? Like they're not trying to create something for a mass audience. They're trying to create something for their own community.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of the people that I talked to when they wanted to make the game, it was like, I want to make it for myself. I just want to see what happens and I put it on itch. And sometimes that gets really good attention and they're like, wow, people resonated just like you were saying before. But also when you were talking, I was thinking about there are people like queer people who got together and they're like, we need to have some financial way to sustain ourselves.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Have you come across the Queer Games bundle on each you have? They're calling for new games right now for this year. So the bundle will be on sale in a month or so. But in the last 2 years or 3 years or so, they've consistently gotten, I think, 250,000 USD for the main bundle that you can just pay. And then there's another one where it's a pay what you want. So they have two different simultaneous bundles, and together they make like 300,000 plus with the USD. And then they split that equally with whoever puts the games inside. And I think the bundle, they usually have about 500 or 600 games and scenes and tools. And
that's
stories.
the publisher.
I'm sure we can put links to that somewhere that people can find.
So
absolutely. Yeah,
people have gotten their medical bills paid, their rents, their emergency issues. Every year when this comes around, it's really amazing. And I mean, it's not sustainable in the way that you can't hire a team when you just get like $5,000 off that split or however many money you get. But it is life-changing for a lot of people to get $5,000 just like once off in a year. That's like more than my tax return. Like, that's amazing. I would love to get $5,000 just to spend on something.
So Xavier, what else have you got coming up? So are we expecting anything else like Pride at Play? Like, can you give us a little hint at what else we can expect?
Yeah. So this has just been announced literally 2 days ago, so I can talk about it on the show. I got into the Sydney Powerhouse, as a research scholar this year in 2020.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm going to go in and go deep into their tabletop and video gaming collection. They have a lot, surprisingly, from like, did you know Dracula, which was like a game made, I think in the early 90s, was in Australia.
Oh, really?
And it's like, I mean, I don't know if it's gay or queer, but Dracula is quite vampire-y. So there's must be some kind of monster.
All vampires are gay, aren't
things
they?
in there, right? And they have a bunch of like, obviously like very colonial era board games, but also more modern games as well. And the Powerhouse also, I talked about a game Imperium to a rock board, that JPEG. The Powerhouse also has that game that it acquired because that was shown at the Powerhouse. And they have the oral history interview with the game developers, Fuzzy Ghost. So I'm kind of looking at the games that was made in Australia that's in the collection in the 1980s all the way to this year. But they're really poorly documented. And if there's any queer history, it's not in the curator's texting anyway. So I'm hoping by the end of this year, I will have found some queerness in our game's history and I will write about them.
And where can people find your work online? How can they continue to support the work that you're doing? Or what final advice would you want to give people in terms of, how you can continue to support queer creatives, queer games, and all the rest?
Yeah, so since we're in Melbourne, there is a community also called the Melbourne Queer TTRPG. It's a Discord server. That's a really good person. Stevie, the person who runs it, they're really great. I would recommend to check them out if you're a tabletop role-playing person. If you're a games developer, like surprisingly to everybody, but not to me, the games industry is super fucking gay. In my research, I found about 1/3 of the games workforce in Australia are not heterosexual or straight. Like, it's pretty gay.
Yeah.
And so if you're a games developer, just go hit up any games meetup. It's super queer,
Chances
super
are
inclusive.
it's going to be higher than the 10% of...
Oh yeah, much higher, right? So we have the independent developer IGDA, Independent Games Developer Association.
Yeah.
They run a monthly meetup also at the Fortress Melbourne where people bring games and showcase them and then do talks and do crits and just have a beer, have a chat. So that's a good place to check out. If you're a player, I think earlier we talked about those tags. That's the really best way to discover. If you don't have anyone to talk to, you're just like looking online.
Yeah.
The LGBTQ plus tag on Steam, also the LGBT and the LGBTQIA plus tag on itch.io are fantastic ways to get started. But if you have a particular niche interest, like you want to find, I don't know, something to do with like lesbian love, women loves women, that kind of tags, those tags exist on itch. So you can find WOW, you can find BL, boys love tags on itch as well. And there's also transgender, that kind of tags. So it's really great to get into specific genres and a particular audience if that's what you want to get into.
It's just been a revelation for me in doing this show as well. I didn't know it existed until about 18 months ago, and I know it's been around for some time, but just the sheer amount of content on there, and especially when you search for LGBT, like...
thousands. And can I say, if you want to buy a game and they're both on itch and Steam, please buy it on itch.
Yeah.
Lots of people might not know Steam takes 70% of the cut. When you 70%.
I thought it was 30. That's right.
Actually, no, it could be 30. Anyway, I don't know.
30.
They take a pretty
70%,
major cut, like a lot, probably 30%, you're right. And each, it's a slider for the developer. They can choose. So you can say, do you want to give like 10% to each completely or 10% to charity or whatever? Or we can take 100% if I want. It's just up to you. And then the default is 10%. So people make more money per unit purchase if you can support them on each than on Steam.
If you were going to make a game, Xavier, what would it be?
About furries, obviously. We haven't talked about that today, but like that's like the obvious thing for me to do. I think for me, animal people have a lot of superpowers, and this is quite natural. So I gave a talk earlier last year. We were talking about Bar SK before at a pub, right? So Louis Roots, who used to run Bar SK, is now the co-director of Free Play, which is a independent, like Australia's longest running independent games festival that's been running for like, I don't know, 17, 19 years. And it's always, they have two shows. They have Free Play Parallels and Free Play Angles, one in June and one in October during the Melbourne International Games Week. And so I gave a talk at one of those events where I talked about furries for the first time in public for me. And I was talking about how animal people have this natural superpower where if you're a squirrel and you're like, you know, a ninja hopping around trees, no one's typically going to question why this person can jump from branch to branch to branch without being like an anime ninja person, because squirrels can glide, can hop. Like they're just really great at navigating nature. And so for me, there's a lot of things you can do when you think about characters with innate animal traits that you can play with a particular kinds of culture and superpowers. So definitely furries. Sorry to kind of jump on that answer on you. Just don't know what exactly I will make.
What genre, anything like that? It's just
visual novel.
Furries
RPG,
will just become its own genre of game.
Probably. It's probably a text.
I don't know.
Platformer.
Very platformer.
Could be platformer, could be a shooter, could be a puzzle, a roguelite.
Well, that's so cool. And Jake and Warren, while you're here, what does Melbourne Gamers have coming up soon?
We've got a meetup on the 26th.
26th,
yes,
of
April of this month, yes. Mm-hmm. And then the following month, we are doing our premiere event at Fortress, which is very exciting. So they've invited us in to see how Melbourne Gamers can help bring more people together, bigger space, all that kind of good stuff. Game library, consoles.
So, April 26th will be Saturday at Molly's in Fitzroy from 12 till 3. And people just come down and get through there. And we'll have a selection of games for people to play and moderators to help teach games and introduce to people. If you're feeling a bit left out or isolated, we'll be able to help with that. And then, May 15th, I think Thursday.
Yeah, Thursday
6
night.
o'clock at Fortress, the arena section, which is in that mid-level. We're going to have the same similar selection of games, including Fortress's library. And then hopefully we're going to be able to then start having a greater variety of console and other games available for people.
I know I'll be there. I think Xavier might try and be there as well if we can.
A lot of the staff there are queer as well. So, so speaking to the events coordinator, it's like, everyone here's queer as well. It's like the game dev scene is like, everyone's just queer.
Completely.
Everyone's gay. I knew it.
Well, all those straight people are just in denial.
Just haven't found the right person yet.
Someone once told me they just need more options.
It's just a phase. They'll get over it.
Well, that's really cool. You've given us so much to think about, and I'm just going to have to scour through this when I edit it so I can make sure I include links to all of the incredible games and groups that you've referenced today, Xavier. Thank you so much. That's super cool. And thank you to Warren and Jake for jumping in.
No, thank you for having us again.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us here, really.
Yeah, it's super cool. And until next time, I've been Davey.
Warren.
Jake.
Xavier.
And we've been the Bargain Bin Gaymers. There you go. You did it. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you give it a big thumbs up on YouTube or follow the podcast wherever you get your podcast from and leave us a 5-star review. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky and follow along on our live Twitch streams. You can also continue the conversation in our BQN podcast Discord by clicking the link in the episode description. Don't forget that the Bargain Bin Gamer is part of a larger network of podcasts called the BQN. You can support this and other BQN programs by becoming a patron over at patreon.com/BQN. We'd love to hear your feedback on the episode. Leave us a comment on YouTube or send us an email to bargainbingamer, GAYMER, @gmail.com. Until next time, au revoir.
Double T Media.